Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a special readout roadshow from the legendary Manuel's Tavern in Atlanta on the eve of voting in Georgia's U.S. Senate runoff. And the stakes could not be higher. It is the second time in 2 years that Georgia voters will decide not just who represents the Peach State and its values in the Senate, but also the direction of our country and whether Democrats will have a clear 51-seat Senate majority in the new Congress. Now, in a moment, I will be joined by the incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock. It is an election that's so critical that more than 1.8 million Georgians voted early, in some cases standing in long lines due to Georgia's 2021 voting law that took aim at mail-in voting after Peach State voters used it in 2020 to send President Biden to the White House and Democratic Senators Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to the Senate, with Georgia voters choosing between Senator Warnock and a Republican opponent for what will be the second runoff in 2 years. Warnock spent the home stretch drawing distinctions with Trump's hand-picked candidate, Herschel Walker, and reminding voters of the urgency of their vote.
I'm not mad that he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm mad that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he thinks he ought to be a United States Senator. He's running for Senate. He's not just your uncle talking at the family reunion. We've got one more day to bring this thing home, and I want you to create a real 911 emergency. I want you to vote like it's an emergency.
As for Herschel Walker, here is his message to voters over the weekend.
God don't need a politician. He need that warrior. That's the one he put me here for. So why are they bringing pronouns in our military? Pronouns? What the heck is a pronoun? I'm sick and tired of that pronoun stuff.
Senator Raphael Warnock will join me shortly. But first up, joining me is Jason Johnson, MSNBC political contributor and host of the podcast A Word with Jason Johnson, and Latasha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
It's nice to be in your town.
It is.
I love Atlanta.
Oh, it has been, and Atlanta's hot. We're hot Atlanta right now.
Atlanta's hot.
It's a little cool, but it's really
It's
hot.
cool, but it's also hot. But then talk to me, because the thing is, Georgia has to vote. It's like Georgia's voting like every 18 months there's another election. And you're out here in these streets, in the bus, in the blackest bus in America, right. Fabulous. What is your motivating message, and how motivated are the voters to do this again?
You know, it's really interesting. It seems like I've been out all day today, and it seems that voters are actually very resolved and very clear about how critical this election is. And so there's actually more energy on the ground, it feels like, in this period than it was in the primary. I think people are very, very focused. But yes, we are tired. There is an element. But what I'm really, really tired of is not having representation that literally is going to represent us, that we have the Republican Party to handpick a candidate, pluck them out of Texas with Trump, and put them here and say that at the end of the day, they should be senator. No, I think that the people of Georgia are going to send him back to Texas where he belongs.
And not even just that. But somebody who the current lieutenant governor says is the worst candidate. He said, let's just play it. Can we play it? This is Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan.
This wasn't the right brand for Republicanism, and I think Herschel Walker will probably go down as one of the worst Republican candidates in our party's history.
Now Jason, I'm just going to say I'm staring in Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Roy Moore, Lauren Boebert, John Kennedy, who I think he's Foghorn Leghorn when he wants to be, Rick Scott, Medicare fraud, Blake Masters, Dr. Oz, J.D. Vance, and Doug Mastriano. Now, so there have been other candidates. I mean, Tuberville is not exactly a genius.
Right.
But none of those guys know how to debate whether they want to be a werewolf or a vampire, right?
Fair.
So they're not that bad. They're not that bad. You know, it's interesting, Joe. What I have seen consistently from my friends here and people on the ground, it's not just what Latasha says, the resolve, but actually, like, the numbers have said it. There's like 5-6% of people who have early voted who didn't vote in the midterms.
Right.
Those are enthusiastic people. Those are not people who have been convinced by, you know, Herschel Walker that they need to participate. They're people who believed in Raphael Warnock. They were maybe playing for overtime, but it seems to be a situation where people are ready, they're voting, they're prepared. They want this to be over so that the governing can start sometime next spring.
Right, and this will be a six-year term, so that people will at least get a break, at least in this situation. But I wonder if that is a motivating factor, because there's data behind this. The great Sahil Kapoor, our reporter at NBC, has, they've laid it out. There are something like 77,000 voters who didn't vote in November who are voting now. And is that because people maybe thought Warnock was a shoo-in before, and maybe now they're deciding?
I do think there are three reasons. I think, one, I think some people really recognize how critical it was. I think there were people who thought that Warnock was going to win, and then when it went in a runoff, they were like, wait, listen, we got to do something different. And so I do think that that was a motivating factor. I think there's also a motivating factor around the more that Herschel Walker talks, the more people are just really like, I really got to go vote now, right? I think they're more inspired to vote. And I think that's an inspiring factor. And then the third thing is, I think that there are really critical needs. While there are some implications around this election for nationally, that in Georgia, we have critical needs in Georgia. And I think the people of Georgia are saying, it is time, this is no more play, GA, that this is time for us to really make sure that we have representation, someone in the Senate that we're going to have for 6 years that are going to fight for the people of Georgia. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
And I wonder if it was a mistake on the part of the handlers of Herschel Walker, people like Lindsey Graham, who have said that the reason to vote for Herschel Walker is nothing to do with the state of Georgia, nothing to do with what would help the state of Georgia. He says vote for Herschel Walker so that, number one, Republicans can say they're not racist, and number two, because somehow every black kid in America would suddenly want to be a Republican. That is not respect for the voters if you say that's why you should vote for this guy.
One of the worst memes images of this campaign season is Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham playing Waldorf and Statler, next to Herschel Walker and telling him what to say. I mean, they could have basically been operating his mouth. Look, this is a guy who, as we've had a chance to focus, yes, he was always incompetent. He always had a terrible background. But his lack of representation of the state, it's not just being from Texas. I bet you if we quizzed him right now, he doesn't know where Manuals is. He probably couldn't find Varsity, right off of 75. Like, when you get a chance to focus on the candidate, people are like, okay, what are the issues that matter in Georgia? Who's the guy who's been here, and who's the guy who just showed up? So I think he was always a failed candidate, but now he doesn't have the momentum of a fake red wave behind him, and it's even harder for people to justify coming out and voting for somebody with
the things that he's focusing on. I'm wondering, I mean, you're out there and seeing this. He's focused on pronouns, which, I mean, I think every fourth grader kind of knows what the pronoun is. He says he doesn't know what they are. That's fine. We'll leave that to the side. Things like trans kids playing sports. It doesn't sound like he really does have a grasp of the issues he would be dealing with if he were in the United States Senate, because I don't think that United States senators legislate pronouns.
No, he is way over his head. The bottom line is we know that he is incapable of serving in this position. We have real concerns in this state. There are 1.5 million people right now in the state of Georgia that are uninsured. We have one of the lowest minimum wages in the country. It's $5.15 an hour for minimum wage. Who can actually live off that? Like, when we're looking at critical issues for Georgia, people care about that in Georgia. And there's a third issue around voting rights that we have not forgotten about SB 202, the voter suppression bill, right? And it has had an impact.
It's why the lines are so long.
It is why the lines are so long. Like, on one hand, while we're saying we're celebrating, yes, there are long lines, it is a shame that we're having people are standing in line 2-3 hours just to cast their ballot to vote. And so we need voting rights legislation, and we need an advocate. We need someone that, like Warnock, that would actually go to the Senate and fight for us, because we're real people and we have real needs.
And the thing is that throughout the country, I think that the Senate, it can be sort of a dry topic, right? People don't really, well, what do? With 51 votes, Democrats got stalled on a lot of the progressive parts of Biden's agenda. He was able to get the Bridges bill through and some things that he could get past a certain senator from West Virginia. But with 51 votes, it really actually does kind of change the game in terms of Democrats' ability to pass some of the rest of that agenda.
We can either ignore Kristen Sinema or, or that senator from West Virginia, One of the two will basically be blanked by this additional seat coming in. And that's huge. And also, I was thinking it matters for judges.
Absolutely.
It matters for judges, and they are the people who are going to be able to protect our democracy in 2024 and beyond, when we see the Republican insurrectionists continue to try and use the law. Because when they can't suppress the vote, and they can't cheat, they try and use the law. They try and use judges. So Warnock getting elected ensures that Biden will continue to fill the federal judiciary with judges that were actually going to represent the people and not just the special interests of a certain party.
And so now I have to ask a question about something mundane, but that as somebody who used to work in campaigns, it actually really does matter. It's raining today. Tomorrow it's likely to rain. Does that, I mean, do you think that winds up having an impact? Because the Walker side is pretty much counting on tomorrow being the whole ball game. And if it rains, I don't know if people have the motivation for Herschel Walker to make him a senator to come out and stand in the rain for hours? I don't know.
Well, I'll just say, I just left the rain. Like, I literally just came out of the ground, that we were on the rain. We were actually in Pittsburgh, in the community here. People were coming out.
Yeah.
People were coming outside. We were actually doing some Christmas giveaways in different places. And folks were saying that they were very determined that they were going to vote.
And what was making them the most determined? What was their
I think that there's a couple of things. I think, one, particularly in the African-American community, Black people are upset. They feel insulted. They feel insulted that here the Republicans would actually pick a candidate, and because he was a ball player, that in some way that we would, and if they planted this narrative that Black men were not going to vote or were upset with the Democratic Party, that those two things would be enough for us to be fooled. We're far more sophisticated voters than that. And there's a certain level of feeling insulted, and that is racist, right? And I think that's a motivating factor. And then there's also a motivating factor of who Warnock is. Warnock is a Southern Baptist preacher who is the minister of Martin Luther King's church.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's a lot of history. That's a lot of connectivity to who we are, our history, and our centering in the community in the South. And so those things are working where I think Black folks are saying enough is enough.
Yeah.
We can show you better than we can tell you.
There is a certain, and I've heard this from a lot of Black men, even if they're not in Georgia, there's a certain disrespect that a lot of Black men in particular feel about particularly the way that Walker has been walked around by people like Lindsey Graham and sort of used and put forward. They don't seem to respect him, and they don't seem to respect Black people.
And that's been the thing all along. Look, we've talked about this before. The narrative that Black men don't show up or Black people don't show up, it's not true. Okay, we didn't see it. We didn't see it with Governor Abrams or wanted to be Governor Abrams. We haven't seen it with Warnock. Black men are turning out to vote in the state like they have in other places. But I think the other thing is this. Hopefully, maybe, I don't know, the Republicans don't seem to learn anything. They seem to think that you can throw any old Black face out there and somehow Black folks are going to be compelled and excited. That does not work. It's never worked. They've tried it for 25 years. You have to actually be somebody who's nominally competent, and heaven forbid you actually care about the community you're representing. These are things that Herschel Walker doesn't do, right? So you can't just throw him out there and say that, okay, well, a blackface is going to motivate people. You have to be able to come through on policy. And one thing I got to say in particular, this is something I actually heard from some of my friends here who are here in Atlanta. This hospital closings are huge. Like people in this area and throughout the state really care. We're still dealing with COVID. We're still in a pandemic. We still got brand new crazy viruses that seem to come out like action movies every year and making kids sick. So a state that is losing hospitals needs an advocate. In Washington, D.C. was like, hey, we need federal funding here because people are getting sick and dying. And that's one thing that Herschel Walker doesn't have planned.
Politics actually is pragmatic, and they have to do pragmatic things, not just tell stories about werewolves.
That's right.
So LaTosha Brown, Jason Johnson, we love these guys. Thank you so much. They are two of the best.